Hello and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus Podcast. Today I was wanting to talk about being right versus doing the right thing. And if you guessed that this is going to be a conversation that is connected to ego, then you're probably right. Because a lot of the times when we're faced with different things in life, we can be driven to prove ourselves right rather than actually make a decision that is the right decision for that moment in time. And so being right focuses, as I said, on proving, on defending our position or our belief systems, on having to win in the face of whatever is happening, whether that's an argument, whether that's a discussion, whether that's an internal battle of wills, whatever that might be. And it comes from that place of needing validation, right? And protecting our own identity. That becomes the highest level of driver for what we're doing, what we're saying, what we're thinking, feeling, behaving. Instead of us taking control of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and showing up and looking at what is the right thing. So what are the outcomes that we're wanting to do? Do we want to rift with this person? Well, then the outcomes are to keep going, right? Are we wanting to maintain our integrity versus showing up in ways that are not so good to look at of us, right? When we're trying to prove ourselves right. Is compassion a major value of ours? Is the right thing, doing the right thing, going to focus more on being compassionate or using our wisdom? What is the long-term impact of whatever we're thinking, feeling, and doing at that point in time? And do we have emotional regulation? So are we running from a space that is high on our cognitive scale, or are we emotionally dysregulated in this environment, which is actually bringing less cognitive ability to the way that we're thinking, feeling, and behaving? And so some people will actually destroy relationships trying to prove a point that they didn't actually need to prove. And, you know, there's a saying that goes out, it's a little bit crass, but like it's a peeing contest, right? Where people traditionally have used that as a reference for, you know, having bigger tools that they can pee with or peeing further or whatever that might be. And that does, although it's a bit crass, it does connect and relate, because some people don't care about the size of the tool or how far that they're peeing. They care more about preserving who they are in that moment and what their values are. And the fact that you might go further, the fact that you might be bigger, it really isn't relevant to them and their self-worth. However, it is to the other person. Some people might just know they're packing big, right? They might know they've got the big tool. They don't need to do a comparison. They're happy in their self-confidence and they don't need to prove themselves. And so this comes from a place of ego, right? And ego is not a bad thing. I just want to put that out there first. Ego is essential in everything we do. But the trick here is to actually create a space where you control the ego and the ego doesn't control you. Because there's spaces that I go into where I need to be a little bit combative, not in a negative way, but I need to be competitive in what I do. I need to put my best foot forward. If I'm running scholarship or funding applications, I need to list all of the things that I'm really good at and all of the achievements that have been made and all the data that supports that. I need to tap into the ego to do that. I need to, when I show up in the way when I do emceeing, or even in this podcast, I do draw a little bit from my ego to be able to go, okay, what are the best ways that I can show up in this space? Ego, how can you help validate the messages that I'm sending through, right? And give me the confidence. However, there's other places where I can feel the ego coming up and trying to push and go, you need to do this. And I'll go, calm down, ego. No, I don't. You only want me to do that because you have a need to show off, or you have a need to be right, or you have a need to be validated. And so ego can come up in a few different ways. It might be being defensive. So if someone comes up with a topic or an idea that isn't in alignment with you, you can dismiss it and be defensive about it and argue about it. Or you can put your ego aside and become curious and go, hey, this might be an opportunity to learn something new. Doesn't mean I'm wrong, just means that my perception or my reality or my framing and thinking was from that perspective, and there could be another perspective that could enhance that. Needing the last word is another ego thing, because even if you're not winning in that communication space, some people feel that the last word, having that, means, cool, I've ended it. That was me. I'm good. You know, that ego coming through. Inability to apologize, over explaining. You know, there's a whole range of different things that the ego can come up and push through. One of them is intellectual superiority. Now, I'm very, very lucky and very blessed to have an amazing mind. It can switch from being completely, energetically focused and look at all of the things around the elements that aren't seen from day to day. So the elements that we don't touch, we can't feel, we can't see, and still have belief and understanding about that and trust, right through to the logic, and being able to use that with my academic studies and with the work I do there. And then in between, it allows me to be curious and learn about lots of different things. I love fun facts, all that sort of stuff. But I do not feel that I have intellectual superiority. I might be in rooms that show that I have a higher intellectual ability, but that doesn't make me superior, because there's things in that room that those people that can do that could outshine me in those areas. And so looking at it from that perspective is, just because you have a talent or a skill or a benefit in one area, you're not superior. We're all people. We all show up. We all have the thoughts and feelings and behaviors that can derail us from time to time. We all have bad habits. We all have everything that makes us human, and no human is superior to any other human. It doesn't matter what job you hold. It doesn't matter what beliefs you have. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. No one is superior to another person. But the ego, if you're sitting in that, will make you feel like you're superior, will make you feel like you're smarter or more intelligent, or I'm a better runner, or I'm a better thinker, or I'm a better enactor, communicator, etc. And when you get to that point as well, you stop learning and growing, because why am I going to do it anymore? I'm superior to everyone. Finding out that we're all on a learning path, that we're just in different stages of that, helps us. And I often talk about, if you think you're the smartest person in the room, find a new room purely for that. Even though I may be in rooms where I do have a higher intellectual ability than people in the room, I know for sure that I'm not the smartest person in the world, right? There's a lot of people out there that would trump me with the intellectual component. So it doesn't, my ego would like me to probably think that I'm superior, but I'm not. And then that's where we're looking at taming the ego and using it rather than it using you. A refusal to reconsider your belief systems. My belief systems have changed throughout my life. From when I was first born to when I was a child, I went through the Catholic school system. So I went to a private primary school and was baptized into the Catholic faith, had my first Holy Communion. And there's a lot of aspects from that I no longer believe in. There's a lot that I do now believe in. And I've reconsidered those beliefs when I've had other information presented to me. And I also have changed my identity throughout my life, right? I was someone that I was highly ego driven, and I did need to prove myself to be able to feel validated and feel secure. And being able to detach from that is a really freeing space. And ego normally is driven from people who are insecure in some way. Now, they're going to have a belief system that they're not, because the ego is tricking them to make them think. And, ego is often protection for people, not confidence. And so people that are deeply secure in themselves can admit mistakes, can change their mind, can get curious about things and want to hear other people's points of view. And they don't need that constant external validation. I've worked very hard on not needing external validation, and mine came from a lot of rejection wounds. So, because I had rejection wounds, I was out there seeking validation so that I would go, oh, cool, I'm not deserving of rejection. But once I healed a lot of those, I came into being very confident in my skin and who I am and how I present. And there was a situation just recently in a group that I was in where I made a decision that other people in the room didn't agree with. Now, I found it was the best decision, and some of the comments that were brought up with from the other people were valid. The process that I used probably wasn't as consultative as it could have been. I made assumptions in the decision that I made without looking deeper into different aspects, but from the information I had presented to me. And so they weren't wrong, but I sat in that and I reflected on that. And I was like, thank you for sharing. This is in my mind. But if I was in the same position again, I'd make the same decision again. And so then I had to decide if being a part of that group actually was to the benefit of the group, because I wasn't prepared to shift from that space. Now, ego would have had me going, but I did it for this and I did it for that, and tried to prove that why I did it. Whereas coming from a place of not needing the ego, I was like, okay, well, I'm prepared to step away if this isn't in alignment with what needs to happen. So although I don't need that constant external validation now, when I do get it, it is still nice, right? And I will often speak it out to remind myself. So if someone says really nice things about me, and I did some forums last week that I think I did very well, and I had one participant come up and say to me, oh, this was great and this was great. Loved how you did that. That was really awesome. Thanks very much for that. And really fed my ego. And I had to say, I went, look, thank you very much for that. My ego loves hearing these things, but I just love to show up as the best version of me. And so do you have any advice on things I could do better? And they didn't at that time, but that's somewhere where I go. And people who are really deeply secure as well, they don't collapse when they're challenged. If they're challenged, they step up to the challenge, or they step away from the challenge. But if they're challenged and they don't win per se, I'm putting that in air quotes for people that are just listening, then if their ego's driving them, that will drive them insane, and they will collapse, and they will go into an emotional space where they will shut off, or they won't communicate clearly, or they'll feel an emotional response to that rather than just going, oh, that didn't go the way I hoped it would. Okay, how do I step forward from here? And so being in our confidence, and this is the thing as well, when people do show up, you would think that some people are confident possibly because they are loud, because they do speak up. Sometimes they might speak over people, those sorts of things, but that's not confidence, that's ego. So someone from a confidence perspective, what did my brother say to me? A wise man never says everything he knows, right? So someone that's confident doesn't need to be the one that's jumping up and challenging and speaking over people, doesn't need all of those things. They may do them as part of a position they hold or as part of an objective they've got, but they don't need it. And that's the difference. Now, unless we're actually working on ego, we might not even pick up that we're doing things from a need rather than from a want or a necessity. We might think it's necessary to do these steps without actually realizing that, hang on a minute, I'm being driven to do this. I'm not choosing to do it. And so some differences here is the ego might say, I need you to know I'm right. Whereas the confidence says, I know who I am, regardless whether you acknowledge what's going on here. I don't need an acknowledgement that I'm right because I know who I am. The ego might say, well, if I'm wrong here, or if I'm called out for this, or something happens, then I lose value. I'm not valuable anymore. Whereas confidence says, well, learning doesn't threaten me. Learning is a strength. If I'm wrong in something, well, that's an opportunity for me to become curious about why, so that I can actually improve my intellect or my skills or my approach or whatever that might be. And so how that's broken down, I suppose, with ego often tends to look for that dominance and control. They need certainty in the situation, and they need the external validation. And having been somewhere that was driven a lot by ego without realization of it in my younger years, and as I was growing up into young adulthood, even mid-adulthood, I suppose, I was very much focused on that dominant space. And because of my intellect, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, I'm a really quick thinker. And so I could say things that would cut people down and create emotional responses in them that would reduce their cognition, and I would be able to dominate them in an intellectual space, or I could control the way they behaved. So when I would say something that would generate an emotional response in someone, to me, I was like, yeah, I got him, right? Oh, yeah, I got him. Because the ego is like, cool, you're controlling the way that they're feeling right now. You're controlling them through them not being able to control their emotions. Whereas when someone sits in their confidence over their ego, the confidence is a more calming space and more grounded. I don't know if you've ever been in a space where you've seen someone trying to trigger someone else and they just maintain who they are, and they just maintain that grounded stability in the way that they're feeling and then also behaving and thinking as well. Confidence also is embodied through flexibility. You know, our brains are designed to be always doing neural pathways and always learning and always growing. But sometimes if you're driven by the ego, you'll get to an age where you believe that you don't need to change anymore because I'm this much old, or I've done it this many times, or I'm this, or I'm that, or I'm that, and I'm okay where I am. And you don't have that flexibility. And also being in confidence, one of the other things that comes from that that's really beneficial is self-trust. Just trusting in yourself that where you are, what you're doing, how you're behaving is the right way to go, and looking to yourself for the answers rather than trying to grip at the need to be right for the answers. So why? Why is the ego doing this, right? So from a psychological perspective, being wrong triggers a lot in people that are driven by ego. Being wrong can trigger shame. As I said, for me, it was triggering my rejection. Some people may feel humiliated, or have a fear of inadequacy. It could come from their childhood conditioning. It could come from their identity and a fear around having that collapse. Right. So if people have grown up in a space where they're criticized or emotionally unsafe, perfection, I was a perfectionist for a lot of my life, and there's still an element there. But again, now I'm not driven by my perfectionist element. I drive the perfectionist element and I bring it up when it's needed. We all have an underlying sense of not being enough. So even myself, I'm probably sit at this point in time with the strongest sense of enoughness that I've ever had at any point in my life. And it's actually bringing up some emotion as I say that, because I never knew or envisaged that I'd be in a position where I could say it. Now, some things are still going to happen in life that are going to challenge that, right? And are going to go, are you sure you feel like you're enough? I'm not saying that life doesn't do that. And at the end of the day, I'm still human. It's a human thing. And so when we're in a space of not being enough, and when that gets triggered, that then brings all of those other things that came with being wrong: shame, rejection, humiliation, those sorts of things. And so if we need an attachment for love, or we need to achieve love, been there before. If we've been in chaotic environments, houses when we're growing up as children, or different relationships, been there before. If we've been around people, as I said before, about being criticized, if we're highly criticized all the time, that affects our enoughness. If there's emotional areas or environments where we're not fully emotionally safe, that triggers our enoughness. So for some people, being right actually equals being safe. And that's why they are unable to see that it's the ego driving them, because they actually just see it as an internal need rather than something they have control over. Now, we are living in a world now as well that it's not just your childhood and your social aspects of school and work and friendships. We've got social media, right? And the modern culture we're living in, and online culture rewards the outrage and the public correction and moral superiority. From an ego perspective, we all know it as the keyboard warrior, right? The person that gets on there and may not have a lot of other stuff going on in their life, but they get on there and they say a little comment that is a little snark and they think it's really clever and people start liking it. And as they're liking it, they're like, yeah, I've got 100 likes. Yeah. And that's rewarding that ego, that sense of winning. But there's other ways that you can do that, right? So instead of being in a gotcha culture, like, gotcha, or arguing to dominate the conversation, become curious and try and understand. I put a post up on my socials this week around gender identity and people who identify with different genders. And one of the main arguments I see around that is people are saying, well, these are the words that are used for men. People that are born as men, we call them he, and people that are born as women, we call them she. And just because they feel like they're a woman, but they were born a man and vice versa, I'm not going to change the way I speak to them. And they're like, I'm not going to be controlled like that. However, if you look underlying, that's very much from ego, right? Because if you look at the underlying aspect of that, you were taught language. It's funny. I shouldn't laugh, but it's interesting watching people get on grab something so tightly that they can't shift without realizing that they're actually contradicting with their own arguments. So you were taught that man is he and taught that female is she, or male and female, he and she, in some particular way from someone. So they've already told you how to behave. And instead of going, okay, I'm going to be flexible and I'm going to become curious about this and try and understand this more, we're in this space where the ego says, no, it can't be different. It doesn't, I don't understand it. It's unfamiliar. It feels unsafe to me. I'm not changing and I'm not going to call you the gender appropriations that you want me to. I'm not going to gender you the way you want me to. And no one can make me. But I'm just going to continue doing it the way that I was made to do it in the first place. You see the contradiction? Anyway, so being somewhere that is in a space of confidence, we can say, hey, that might feel awkward actually calling you what you are not normally gendered as. The first thing you would do with that is go internal. Why? Why is that triggering me? Why am I being inflexible here? Not because of the societal concepts or anything around there, but dig deep and do the 5 whys on why. Why am I stuck with this thinking system around this particular topic? It might be because you interacted with someone who had, transitioned gender and that affected you and created trauma for you. Okay, cool. Now start unpacking that. Majority of people, it's just being that it's unfamiliar, or the group of people I hang around all have this belief system, so it's mine, and it's more identity driven. So true wisdom often sounds a lot quieter than the ego. So that's another thing you can pick up. If the person will just drop a few seeds and step back, that's usually not an ego-driven thing. That's usually driven from their own self-confidence. And, in the workplace as well, this is really prevalent. And, I've got a lot of experience and knowledge around organizational psychology and, I've been with leaders that need to be right, and that trumps their ability to do the right thing. So one of the organizations I was in, I was part of a senior leadership team, and one of the other senior leaders and I had a conflict. And I was investigating and something had come out and there was a mistruth. And so they become reactive, claiming that I was accusing them of lying. I'm like, I'm not accusing you of anything. I've just got evidence here that differs from what you're telling me. I'm trying to get clarity. But it triggered them, right? And so then there was a bit of a rift between us. They did some actions that were really not effective or helpful. And they came in later on to apologize to me. Like, they basically threw me under the bus and tried to make me look super bad. And I did say to them, look, I accept your apology. Thank you very much. But you realize now, though, that this still does change our relationship, because we aren't friends. You've just shown me that you're not my friend from the way you behave. So now we just become colleagues. And that triggered them because I wasn't accepting their apology and going, yeah, okay, cool, mate, and being like we were before. Because what they did was enough to actually break my trust. And I couldn't trust them as I would a friend again. And so where I'm going to with this is we're rolling out some work across the whole organization. And I had one of the other middle leaders contact me and go, hey, I don't want to get involved or cause dramas, but that thing that you're asking us to do, we've just been told by this other leader to not do it. And I'm like, okay, cool. Now you tell me, was that from a place of wanting to be right or wanting to do the right thing? Right. And so here's the other element as well. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean no one else can. And the funny thing is that everyone else can. So when we're putting ourselves in this position of driving ourselves to be right, everyone else notices. And leaders that are stuck in being right instead of doing the right thing, that are really driven by ego, reduce psychological safety. They come in using emotions to manipulate the work environment, whether that be anger, disappointment, et cetera, et cetera. They shut down innovation. They prevent collaboration. They create cultures of fear. They stifle that creativity space because people don't want to think differently or be flexible because that's not going to align, right? But when you're a strong leader and you're not driven by ego, you may tap into ego from time to time. You can't be in a leadership role and not at least tap into it and use it to your benefit. But if you're being controlled by it rather than controlling it, that's where the issue sits. So when you're controlling your ego, you're showing up in a space where you will be listening and be becoming curious and being open to the ideas of your team. You will be able to regulate your emotions and not be triggered or take things personally by your team members or other people in the organization. And you'll be able to prioritize the outcomes. You know, we want to do what is the right thing, not just be right. And so the best leaders, they don't create followers that agree with everything. And a leader that comes from a space of ego will surround themselves with people that will just be yes, 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 3 bags full. But good leaders create an environment where people feel safe to think, feel safe to bring up contradicting ideas or suggestions, or bring up things that are completely out of the box, that invoke thinking, and they are critical thinkers as well, rather than just followers on the space. And so not only is it apparent within workplaces, but also within relationships as well. Yeah, how many times have you had an argument with a significant other, whether that be a family member or a partner or even children, where you're not arguing about facts, you're just arguing because you need to be heard or you need to feel seen from somewhere. And you set up this power struggle that comes more from emotional wounds and that fear of vulnerability. And, you know, in some relationships, people can become scorekeepers. Oh, I did this for you, and now I think you need to do this for me. Or I'm always the one that does this, or, you know, et cetera, et cetera. When we have an argument, you're always doing this. You could also be in a space where old arguments are coming up. Things from ages ago are coming through because they haven't been processed and dealt with effectively because the communication isn't effective, right? And so when we're driven from ego, again, we want to prove ourselves right. We will start bringing data from wherever we can to be able to validate our positioning so that we can get the level up. They start in those spaces when we're driven from ego. We try and have moral superiority. I was better at this than you, or I make better decisions than you, or I do this, or I do this. And it becomes more about the I instead of the we. And I think what we miss when we're in relationships is, yes, there's going to be disagreements, and yes, conflict can be really helpful if it's managed effectively, but it's the two of you against a problem, not the two of you against each other because of a problem. And that's where the ego comes in. The ego will come in and go, there's a problem. Okay, I need to be the superior one here. Instead of going, there's a problem, put the ego aside and go, hey, you and I, we've got something to work out. This is an issue. How can we collectively do things together that are going to remove this from being an issue? And so if your goal is connection, sometimes understanding matters more than victory. And I know in the relationships that I was in early stages, there was lots of arguments and my ego would come through all the time. And I actually got to a point in one of my relationships where I ditched the ego because I was working on that really hard. And when I felt the environment shift and I knew that I wasn't being heard, it was just about, the other person was driven from a place of ego, I would walk away. And then, the comment was going, oh, you don't have enough feeling towards this. You're heartless. You don't care about this as much as I do. And I would just simply turn around and say, I care a lot about this. And this is why I'm walking away, because at the moment, the energy isn't right to have this discussion. Right. And so it was instead of me being right, I chose to do the right thing. And so if we look at the spiritual or consciousness aspect of this, we can look at it because the more conscious we become, the more we realize how little we truly know, right? And that stops us from sitting in that ego as much. It helps us looking at our attachment to our identities, our attachment to our beliefs, that illusion of certainty that we have, surrendering to that need of control perception, having humility when we're looking at those sorts of things, and moving into a space where we are controlling the emotions, thoughts, and behaviors and ego, that's all connected, rather than having it control us. And this then creates a lot of discernment and awareness. It allows us to observe our ego better and also witness those emotional triggers rather than reacting from them. So if you're someone that feels emotionally activated when you're challenged, you need the last word. You're mentally preparing how you're going to respond when someone else is speaking rather than listening to exactly what they're saying. One thing I was also and still working on now is over-explaining, trying to get people to understand me, or ruminating after an argument on what I should have done better. If you need others to validate you, your intelligence, your superiority, your worthiness, or if you feel threatened by differences of opinions and the way people show up, then chances are you're operating from your ego. And so you can combat that by pausing before you react, or asking yourself, what outcome do I really want here? It can be overcome through curiosity, one of my favorite things to share and to do. From separating your identity from the opinion, from looking at it as an observer rather than being involved in it, to admitting when you might be wrong or when you might have space to learn more or take in different perspectives, and when you stop seeing disagreement as an actual attack on you. So real confidence doesn't need to announce itself constantly. It's just there. Anyway, I hope this episode has added some value for you, and I look forward to serving you again in our next episode.